Welcome back to the first team. I am Joe DeLeone. Joining me as always, my good friend and co-host Ryan Roberts. And today we are going to be previewing the Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama. That is going to be kicking off next week with practices starting next Tuesday, I believe. We won't be making the trip this year, but we obviously still will be covering it closely, breaking down the film, talking about the daily risers, top performers, all of that and so much more coming next week. But today, with a week to go, we want to discuss who are three players each, maybe a little bit more, that we think are the most important to know going into the week. It's a very talented roster because we've got all of these juniors that are playing in the game, and we want to help you understand the future faces of your team who could be big risers throughout this process, who could have really big weeks of practice and end up building and boosting their stock. We've seen tons of guys do it. Last year, we had a number of players like Tyjae Spears and Ade Odobware who could maybe be those guys this year. Ryan, just to reiterate, though, this is probably one of the most talented Senior Bowl classes I've ever seen, obviously, because they've got all these juniors to work with.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up only being like 50-something underclassmen ended up declaring, but the fact that you have some redshirt juniors, you have some true juniors, you have the ability to take those underclassmen on top of the top seniors every single year. Because I think we're also starting to get to the other point of the COVID year, Joe, where it's like after 2025, we don't have to talk about the COVID year anymore, but we're still
Thank
getting
God.
like that. We're getting that still getting that high volume of draft classes, right? Like we still have run into a few bigger draft classes over the last couple years, especially. So I think we are getting to the point where there's a whole lot of seniors, and now that you can take underclassmen, the Senior Bowl especially has been able to feast off of this ability. They really have, because the East West I know is put together the best roster they possibly can, but this year I think that the Senior Bowl has really just even upped their game further. I mean, every year they are the
Yeah.
premier NFL All-Star game, but this year they have put together one of the best rosters I can remember from top to bottom for Senior Bowl perspective.
Yeah, and you'd seen Jim Nagy kind of tweet about and talk about on social media that it has become harder to really build these rosters because of the fact that there just is not that same level of depth. A lot of guys deciding to go back because of NIL deal opportunities. It is a very rare period of time. I think that this stuff kind of eases itself out after 2025, as you
Yep.
mentioned there, and it'll probably be a little bit more balanced, but it
It's
hasn't
all
actually.
cyclical. It's all
Right.
cyclical.
Right.
Yeah.
But in a way, though, this hasn't really impacted the Senior Bowl roster because they were able to use the juniors this year, which I wonder if there ended up being a correlation to fill some of those gaps. And they've also done a really good job of just stealing guys from the Shrine Game and pulling some of those top players. Like one guy that comes to mind that I was excited that was added to the mix was like Jawar Jordan. Like that's a really good explosive running back from Louisville who I think adding him, who originally was a Shrine Game invite, is just a nice piece to be playing in this game.
Well, I mean, it happens every year. I mean, I know you really like the Jalix Hunt kid, right? The Houston Baptist kid or whatever the heck his
I
name
really
is.
like him.
The edge. I mean, he was literally the first player that was off or extended an invite from the East West Shrine Bowl. And then obviously the Senior Bowl comes in shortly after that and is able to kind of just, derail that potential of happening. But we see it every single year, man. I mean, every single year we see guys that get elevated from. Well, it used to be the games were spaced out more, right? So it would be East West, then the Senior Bowl. So guys would elevate from the Shrine Bowl to the Senior Bowl, but with the bad blood between the East West and the Shrine Bowl or Senior Bowl now, the Senior Bowl just kind of steals some guys before the events even start, which is hilarious. But yes, I'm excited to see a couple of those guys because there were a couple of head scratches at first, Joe, where you're just kind of like, why isn't he getting a Senior Bowl invite? Like, why isn't he a guy that's on that radar? And then it makes sense that the roster's just because you had to think of it. There had to be a little bit of a strategic feel this year for the Senior Bowl for Jim Nagy, I think, because it isn't just, getting the best 100 plus seniors overall. It was also, you did have to account into what underclassmen are going to be potentially for this game. So you have to hold certain roster spots to a certain number of underclassmen and guys that wouldn't typically be eligible. So there's been a lot of layers to this development for the Senior Bowl, but I think that overall they've been able to put together obviously a fantastic roster as per usual.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts. So I'm going to start us off here. I tried to pick guys that I don't think are clear-cut guaranteed first rounders. Like I didn't do Talise Fuaga. I didn't do Lietu Latu. I didn't try to go that route in picking players that I think have kind of identified and solidified where they're going to be picked. I try to go with guys that I think are going to really help their case. The first one I have written down, I have a feeling I might be stealing this one from you. Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo. Yeah, I ended up stealing that from you. I'll end up giving a fourth one because I stole that one.
I had 5 guys written down, so I have a couple extras. So you're good. Yeah.
I think that Quinyon Mitchell, you and I are really big fans of his. I put him in my latest mock draft as a first rounder. I think physically he's got some just tremendous traits. Not like a super tall, long corner, but the athleticism, the long speed, the hip fluidity is fantastic. Didn't really have much of an opportunity to face off with much high caliber competition this year. So we don't really know how he's going to look against some of the better receivers. To get him out there and to have an opportunity to maybe lock some guys up, maybe get a couple picks, make a couple big plays on the ball when it's in the air, I think is going to be some nice proof for people to start talking about that aren't as deep doven in some of the more, national media or the team specific media that are going to be like, oh, who's this Quin Yan Mitchell kid from Toledo? He feels like one of those guys that is going to be suddenly on everybody's radar.
So the Senior Bowl, for people that don't frequent it or don't watch it or don't care about it, I mean, I feel like most people that listen to an NFL draft podcast probably care about the Senior Bowl. I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. But regardless, it is always slanted towards offensive players from a wide receiver versus defensive back perspective. Because the one thing that everyone wants to flock to and everybody wants to watch, one-on-ones, wide receivers, DBs, offensive line, defensive line. For the wide receiver cornerback conversation or the defensive back conversation, wide receiver definitely have the advantage because there's no help. It's just a one-on-one situation, a lot of space, and it's a tough matchup to be in one-on-one coverage just in general. So usually wide receivers are the people that we leave these events with and say like, oh, that guy was a budding star. Tank Dell was one last year, right? Where you're like, he was uncoverable.
Yeah.
And, but you're also like, but it is slanted towards him. Every so often, though, every single year, you get a couple corners that do really well for themselves and show that they can have that type of upside. So, yes, Quin Yan Mitchell was a guy that I did have on my list because 6'1.5", I think he was 6'4", 6 foot and 4/8, I believe, verified in the spring, 196 pounds. He has requisite size, length, athleticism, was estimated, I believe, during for scouts in the spring, between 4.38 and 4.42. Like, he can turn and run really well, plays exclusively off man coverage for the most part at Toledo and some zone mixed in, which I'm interested to see if they put him up on the line of scrimmage a little bit and some press opportunities, see if he can kind of be a guy that can do those types of things a little bit more than what he was asked to do with the Rockets. But regardless, I think that he could be a big winner. Another guy that I really liked, because I had Talise Fuaga on the list, Joe. I had him on the list, but it's boring at this point because he's a first-round player. If you've listened to this podcast, you frequented this podcast, you know who Talise Fuaga is, right tackle out of Oregon State. This isn't a new name to know, which I think is why you come to these types of podcasts. You don't just come and listen to just the mainstream names all the time. You want to hear about the day 2 guys. You want to hear about the day 3 guys. You want to hear about the priority free agents. You want to hear about guys that are going to make up the bulk of an NFL roster, which is why I want to bring this name to the table, Joe. I also had Troy Fontanu on this list, but I wasn't going to bring him up most likely. Dude, he was the 5th guy on my list because it was again, first round pick more than likely.
Right.
Everybody knows who Troy Fontanu is. I'm going to go with his teammate, though. Roger Rosengarten, who's the starting right tackle out of Washington. I do really like Roger Rosengarten. I hate the thought process that's out there with Roger Rosengarten because immediately people are going to say, wait, is that 73 for Washington? Because they'll remember one game. They'll remember the Michigan game.
But what have you done for me lately, man? What have you done for me lately?
He gave up 2 or 3 bad pressures against Michigan, did not have a good football game overall, was actually not as bad as people act like it was, but he had a couple really bad pressures given up in inopportune times in that game. But for the better part of the last 2 years, he's had tremendous film. 6'6", 303 pounds listed. I think he's going to hit the requisite, because the Senior Bowl weigh-ins is going to be a big conversation too. I think he's going to hit requisite length aspect to be able to stay at offensive tackle in the next level. He is just smooth, about as smooth as you will find of any offensive lineman in this class. Do I think that some guys maybe have more explosive pass sets than him? Sure. Do I think that some people have more explosive core strength than Roger Rosengarten? Sure. But what he is, Joe, is he is just a smooth mover, man. And he makes everything look so easy all the time. Power profile is still developing. But from a pass set perspective, from a getting up to the second level, working combos, working, the combo to the second level and to linebackers and secondary in space, this kid is just a really good overall talent at the offensive tackle position. And as he continues to develop that core strength, I think that he has a chance to be a plus starting offensive lineman on next level. People are going to hear Roger Rosengarten's name. They're going to be like, that guy can't play in the NFL, because they just remember the Michigan game for a couple reps. When in reality, I think Roger Rosengarten is going to go in day 2. I think he's going to go second or third round, and he's going to be a starting right tackle very early on in his career. Reminds me a lot of former Cleveland Brown, and I think he also played, Cleveland Brown started, then Kansas City Chief, Mitchell Schwartz. That's who he reminds me of. Mitchell was he was the same way. Nothing about Mitchell was elite. Nothing about Mitchell was like, oh my gosh, look at that length, look at that athleticism. But he was good at everything, and he was a technician. Roger Rosengarten, I think, is a starting right tackle in the NFL, and I think that he has one of those weeks of Senior Bowl where you're just like, wow, just didn't lose many reps all week, man. He just stacked reps. Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle, Washington.
Yeah, he feels like he could be one of those guys that just has a really steady week. I haven't evaluated and watched him yet on my list of guys that I've been getting to. He's like number 11 on the 10 that I was playing, or I've watched 10. He was number 11 to get to next as I'm trying to get to some of these other position groups. So I like that Ryan Rosengarten ad. My second one, or Roger Rosengarten. Roger Rosengarten.
His stock just rose with his first name being Ryan.
Oh, shut up. My second one, Michael Hall Jr. I think back to every year with these one-on-ones. The guys that tend to dominate as interior defensive linemen are the guys that are quick, the guys that have good hands, and the guys that are low to the ground. And I look at Michael Hall Jr., who fits all of those descriptors. He's got very quick feet. He has very active hands. Didn't really have the sack production or the tackle for loss production that you would expect for a player like him. He was more of a disruptor and intended to divert attention away. I think that this is a guy who shows up and causes a problem for all of the interior offensive linemen that he is going to be facing off with during the week, during the team periods. He feels like a player that is going to be clogging up lanes and maybe getting a couple tackles for loss. He feels like a gamer and a guy who had to rotate a ton at Ohio State. He wasn't, and we talked about him, a full-time, constantly on the field starter because they were rotating multiple defensive linemen. He's going to get more reps, more opportunities to really shine and show that he can be a problem in the interior. And I think an athletic player like Michael Hall Jr. is going to start that rise throughout the process here at the Senior Bowl.
The Senior Bowl new format of allowing underclassmen is the perfect one for a guy like a Michael Hall Jr. because, Joe, the youngest player that will be at the Senior Bowl this year is Michael Hall Jr.
Oh, really? I didn't know
players that have been invited and have accepted invites, unless there's somebody last minute here. He is going to only be 20 years old on draft night. Not even 21 years old yet. 6th youngest person in the 2024 NFL draft of draft eligible prospects. So, yeah, he has the opportunity to make him some money because, like you said, I think that there is a stay power to being able to be an asset, high volume against the run on early downs. But if you can rush the passer from the interior on the next level, there's going to be a spot for you in the NFL. There just is. In a passing league, there's just going to be that spot. Michael Hall, I wanted him to take a bigger step in 2023 than he did. But regardless, he's a very talented player and a player that I think can make some money in Mobile. There's no doubt. My second guy, one that I don't think we've ever talked about on this podcast. So new name to the show. Jaden Hicks, safety, Washington State.
Oh, we've talked about him off air plenty.
Oh, yes. Dude, I love Jaden Hicks. I think he's the most underrated safety in the 2024 NFL draft. 6'3", 215 pounds. I think he's probably more in the 6'2", 6'2.5" range, but regardless, he's a big boy safety, man. Like, he looks the part of those hybrid defenders that we're starting to see. Is he a safety? Can he play some big nickel? Can he play on the second level a ton? And the answer is yes. Jaden Hicks is a very smooth, explosive, all-around athlete. I don't think that he's a guy that you're ever going to work in single high situations a ton, range from the back end over top, but he's a guy that ranging downhill, playing some man-to-man coverage and working in the box. Great football player, man. I expect him during Mobile to be able to, at 6'3", 6'2", 6'3", 215 pounds, play man-to-man against some bigger slots. Tight end eraser potentially on the next level. I'm excited to see him against the tight end group that we have down in Mobile. I'm also excited to see him if he works in any linebacker drills, one-on-one against running backs, whether that's as a blitzer or in pass coverage as well. This is a Swiss Army knife on the second and third level for a defense that is probably the most underrated player in this class from a safety perspective. So Jaden Hicks, Washington State. Also young too, by the way. Only a redshirt sophomore coming out, and he's at this football game, which is pretty wild.
He can kind of be like last year, if you recall, Marte Mapu was a huge riser, and he had a much more not difficult, but like a lot more unknown path to get to being as drafted as high as he was by the Patriots. He was a UDFA pretty much for the most part, coming from Sac State. Nobody knew who he was. And I think he came from, was it CGS that he got the invite from?
So great little backstory on Marte Mapu, Sacramento State.
Yeah.
Joe, he was set to go to the College Ground Showcase. Well, didn't have an invite. He was set to go to CGS. And then there was a little bit of some issues on the back end there, which eventually made him go to the Hula Bowl, I believe, at first. And then he eventually elevated all the way to the Senior Bowl.
But he had a really good week because they asked him to play linebacker. They asked him to play a little safety, and he shined in both situations. And as you talked about here, same physical profile for these box safeties, hybrid linebackers. I remember watching Jaden Hicks, him against Wisconsin. I watched that film and was one of the guys that I immediately wrote down. I also wrote down James Thompson Jr., who I don't know if he declared the Wisconsin.
No, I think he's going back.
Oh, that's so disappointing because he was such a fun defensive lineman to watch. But those two guys really stood out to me. But the thing with Jaden Hicks is you talked about big frame, good tackler, very aggressive downhill. I love these big body guys that fly up field, safeties that play like linebackers that were playing purely as a safety in college. I know that guy's going to work in the NFL because we need plenty more of these hybrid style players. The last one that I have, and we've got enough time that maybe we do two more each, but Christian Haynes from UConn, I think is a name to acknowledge. He's not like Zion Johnson, but I feel like he could have a Zion Johnson type week because he's smaller than Zion Johnson, but he's very stoutly built.
Long, dude. He's got pretty long arms too, man. He's almost got 34-inch arms.
Christian Haynes,
right. He's got like 33 and 7/8 or something like that. Yeah,
which is really unexpected for this smaller, more compact guard/center. I think he might end up being a center, and we're going to get to see him snap, which is a really nice thing. And if he snaps well and he moves well from that center position, that's going to be really awesome. But he's just got such a really good lower half, and I love the lower body power that he has. Started to see this year that this guy can move pretty well. Didn't see that originally from him when I watched his 2022 tape, and then 2023 started to really see that he can get to the second level. He can play in space. So I think that Christian Haynes is a guy who, as we're talking about, the ones who win these one-on-ones tend to be the more technically sound players with good lower body strength. It doesn't really play to be the tall, lean, weaker guy in these one-on-ones, because then there's going to be a rep or two where you get put on your ass. I don't think Christian Haynes is that guy, and I think he's going to be planting a couple of these defensive linemen.
I mean, is there any doubt that Christian Haynes is just going to be a good player in the NFL for a long time? I mean, like I don't see him not being at least a steady, solid NFL player for a long time.
Who is the? Oh no, you know what? I'm thinking of the defensive lineman from UConn. I'm mixing it. Who was the kid last year?
Travis Jones.
Yeah, I don't know why it made me think of Travis Jones, but I mean, it's like the reverse of Travis Jones is what Christian Haynes is.
Yeah. Well, next guy, Joe, you're talking about underrated and guys that are undervalued in this class, which is what Christian Haynes is. Lad McConkey from
Oh,
Georgia.
that was gonna be my fourth one.
Is it? What's it actually? I have another. I have another one I can throw out there.
No. Do Lad because I have a fifth one. Go ahead, do Lad.
5'11" and some change. I think he's like 5'11" and 1/8, 185 pounds. Joe, who dominates Senior Bowl 101s as wide
This
receivers?
is exactly why I wrote him down. It's
the quick twitch route runners who can change tempo in their routes and get guys in bad situations one-on-one. Yeah. That is Lad McConkey. Lad McConkey also is going to run pretty well in the 40. I guarantee it's like 4.42 to 4.45. Like he's going to run pretty well at the combine. He was injured a bit his last year at Georgia, was obviously able to be available down the stretch and had a couple of big games. This kid's going to go a lot higher than people think. Some people are going to think wide receiver. They're going to be like, oh, late day 3. He might end up going in like the third rounds. It's possible that Lad ends up going that high because he's just so solid to good at everything, man. Like he's a good athlete, pretty explosive, and he's a young man that I think is going to run great routes in down in Mobile. I think he's going to catch everything. Yes, he's a smaller guy. Yes, his play strength is never going to be to the level that you're like, oh my God, wide receiver 1. But that kid's going to dominate that week because the bigger corners, especially, that are going to be down in Mobile, are going to look at 5'11", 185 Lad McConkey and just begin to like just have a temper tantrum because they're like, dude, I know I can't cover this guy one-on-one. Like it's just not going to happen. So Lad McConkey is going to be everyone's favorite wide receiver down in Mobile this week, in my opinion, because he's the type of wide receiver that always has big weeks down in Alabama.
Yeah, this is an easy one. As you talked about, the guys that tend to excel during this week are the ones who very quick feet, really good release. And then the biggest thing is we always get all geeked up over, or just the general media gets geeked up over, is lots of separation between receivers and defensive backs. So he's going to create that separation because he accelerates and has really good long speed, so that he's going to be able to do that. As you talked about, is a very just well-rounded football player and could be a name that starts to pick up some steam at the Senior Bowl that will eventually test well at the NFL Combine. My last guy before you share your last one, Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon. Was that one that you had?
Well, I have a little bit of a different view on this one, but go ahead. Okay. Yeah, you start the conversation. Yep.
Jackson Powers Johnson is, for me right now, I believe my highest rated center. Not because he is like a super twitched up, insanely talented center prospect, because he's really well-rounded. And I think that he brings a really high floor to the position. It reminds me a ton of John Michael Schmitz last year, who showed up and was just the steadiest guy all week long. And we talked about him.
Did he lose a rep? Did John Michael Schmitz lose a rep last year?
No. Did John Michael Schmitz like dominate and completely eviscerate anyone in any reps? No, not really. But those that were paying attention more to the steadiness really acknowledged that John Michael Schmitz had a strong, really consistent week. Another 3-name guy with Jackson Powers Johnson, the hyphen crew over here, is going to have
Does that matter?
himself.
Why is that a conversation?
I don't know. It just happens to be a part of the discussion. I think that he's that type of player that's just going to be really steady, does his job consistently like he did at Oregon, and is going to not lose any reps, not really win them in an exciting manner, but not really lose them enough to put himself into that conversation of in affirming that he is the number 1 center.
I think there's going to be a fascinating battle in Mobile. This is why I was going to mention Jackson Powers Johnson, because the most likely offensive center 1 in this class is going to be in Mobile. The question is it Jackson or is it Zach Frazier from West Virginia, who I love? I love Zach Frazier. I would take that kid early day 2 and not even think twice about it. Now, I think Jackson has more of an upside to potentially going in the late first rounds than what a Zach Frazier does, because Zach is a little bit sawed off and a little bit more, not as big and kind of has that upside to him from a body type perspective. But I think that both players are starting centers very early on in his career. If you told me right now Jackson goes center 1 in the early second round, or Zach Frazier goes center 1 in the early second round, I would buy either argument right now. I really would. I don't think there's like a foregone conclusion there. So the battle to be the first center off the board, the first true interior player off the board, I think that's going to be fascinating to see which one of these centers can take advantage of their opportunity.
I like the ad of Zach Frazier too. I think that
good player, man.
I have no idea what teams they're on.
I can try to find that real quick. No, this thing just has them grouped as positions.
Yeah, I was
So
gonna
yeah,
say I don't think that's like really true. I think they're releasing now
because it's not
what
like an
position
East-West
groups.
thing anymore, right? It's like a
Yeah.
national American thing. Like I don't
That
know.
I would love to see back-to-back reps of Powers Johnson, then Zach Frazier, but I would be willing to bet they're probably going to separate them because they don't want them on the
Quality of
same.
the game and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
but I like that too. They're just so different too, which is
yes,
going to make this a really interesting debate.
yeah.
I currently have Powers Johnson, then Frazier,
Okay,
so I'm leaning that direction. But I would love to see Frazier just show why he's such a easy mover. He's
yeah.
gotten compared to Jason Kelsey a bit, and I think that's a fair comparison because he's smaller, very good with leverage, hand
Yep.
placement,
And a
all
big
that
time
stuff.
high school wrestler, man. Big time
Yep.
high school wrestler. And that comes up on film. Like he understands leverage, hand play, and how to finish blocks. That hip torque that you need to finish blocks. So I'm a big fan of Zach Frazier. I'm still need to finalize kind of my grade and my thoughts on Jackson, but overall, I think that it's a pretty solid center class, man. It's not bad.
Yeah.
I think that the whole interior in general is a little bit of a below average class, but I think the center group has a couple guys that I'm pretty excited about.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy the Senior Bowl. Let us know what you think. Any guys that you're excited to watch in the comments below. And all of next week, we're going to be covering and talking about the top performers. Stay tuned. We'll be back.